airport in Japan, a true pioneer of civil engineering that's just turned 30 years old. And it has some pretty impressive achievements to its name. It was the first airport ever built on reclaimed land in the ocean. It has the longest terminal building in the world. And it never lost a single item of luggage. But it does have one rather big problem. It's sinking. But the story doesn't stop there, because despite that, it's getting a $500 million facelift to increase capacity and improve its status as a regional hub. So how did they build an airport in the ocean? How did it go wrong? And what does the future hold for Kansai International?
Nowadays, building an airport on water is fairly common. But none of these would have been possible without the radical design of Osaka's Kansai Airport. When construction began in 1987, it was decades ahead of its time. It took 20 years to plan, 7 years to build, and then when it finally opened, it was the most expensive civil engineering project in modern history. It cost $14 billion to construct. That's nearly $40 billion in today's money. The bridge to the mainland alone cost a cool $1 billion. All this to build a miraculous city in the ocean.
But that all kind of begs the question, why bother?
Well, after the Second World War, Japan experienced decades of staggering economic growth that made it the world's second biggest economy by 1968.
And key to the country's growth was infrastructure.
This is Osaka. In the 1960s, it was Japan's second largest city. And this is its airport.
I think you can see where we're going with this. The airport can't expand if it's stuck inside the city, and the city can't expand if its airport can't keep up with demand.
A new airport was needed, but Osaka is surrounded by mountains, and there just wasn't anywhere to put it.
So a radical solution was needed.
By the early 1970s, 4 sites were being considered for the future airports, 3 of which were out at sea.
File free in the app if you didn't use us last year. Just file with TurboTax Do-It-Yourself by February 18th.
But how do you build an airport in the middle of an ocean? Well, the first thing you need to do is secure a solid foundation. This is a cross-section of Osaka Bay, represented here in a Lego model that my kids had made. Now, they only made this on the condition that I would give them a shout-out in a YouTube video and help make them famous. So, hello kids, thanks for the Lego. Daddy loves you. Now, this is representative, as I said, of Osaka Bay.
How the fuck is that a shout-out?
Top bit here is water, that's about 18 metres deep. Below that is a layer of Holocene clay that's also about 18 metres deep. Underneath that is a much bigger zone of strata that includes much thicker clay and, crucially, some pockets of sand, represented here very crudely.
So no, that shit
not
on rock.
Now, remember those pockets of sand, because we're going to come back to it a bit later on. Fetch the sponge.
That shit going
away.
Now,
that area of brown and grey clay I just showed you, that's now represented by a yellow sponge, stay with us, is filled with lots of holes that fill with water, meaning it's quite thick, but also quite weak. If I try and build anything on it, it just deforms straight away. Now, that's called settlement, and for those of you who aren't structural engineers, just know that it's really not very good if you're trying to build an airport. So what you want to do is consolidate that layer as far as possible, squeezing all the water out and compacting it as far as possible until you get a nice solid layer to build on. Now, that all sounds really simple in theory, but how on earth do you do that on the bottom of the seabed? Well, you use something called sand drains. Here's how they work.
Columns are dug into the ground and filled with sand before being capped off by another layer of sand. The space above the sand mat is then filled in with rubble, which forces...
So wait, what the fuck the ocean floor filled up with? Is I'm dumb? I thought ocean floor filled up with sand. So it's not sand?
forces everything downwards. Under this pressure, the water that's trapped inside the clay moves sideways and into the sand drains.
It's in the clay.
Because water travels more easily through sand, it shoots up to the top where it's drained away into the sea or evaporated. The land below then becomes dry, compact, and crucially, stable. Construction first began in 1987. 1 million sand drains were installed at the site in Osaka Bay, each 40 centimetres wide and 20 metres deep. Next, to protect the site and give the island its shape, an 11-kilometre long seawall was constructed using 48,000 tetrapods. Then came the massive job of filling in the island with earth. Over the course of more than 3 years, 180 million cubic metres of earth was poured in to create the island. That's about 75 times the volume of the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Over the next few years, 10,000 people worked 10 million work hours to fill in the future airport site.
Now, before we go any further, if these statistics make you wonder how on earth any project like this stays on track, then you might want to consider this week's video sponsor, Innate. Constructing your workflow. To find out more about how Innate can transform your project management, click the link below. Now, let's get back to that airport. By 1992, the reclamation work was complete, and a brand new island sat proudly in Osaka Bay.
The massive weight of the landfill had pushed all the water out of the clay seabed, compacting it and creating a nice solid layer to build on. Or so they thought. Engineers always knew the island would sink a bit as the seabed compacted, but in 1990, 3 years after construction began, they discovered that it was sinking much faster than expected, by about 5 centimetres a month. $100 million was spent to bulk up the island's height and ensure it didn't sink below 4 metres above sea level. That's the height it has to be to avoid being flooded by rough seas.
Happy birthday, Marty. Oh, no, you don't. Let me get this.
Why did it just put a wall around?
Thanks. You're too kind.
I've heard that.
Unlimited 2% cash back. The Wells Fargo Active Cash Credit Card.
At Verizon, we'll pay off your old phone. And you'll get iPhone 16 on us.
Originally, engineers thought the island would sink by about 8 metres over the course of 50 years, but it sunk by more than that by the time the airport opened in 1994. 8 years later, it had sunk by 12 metres. But why? Well, it all comes down to those different levels of clay we discussed earlier. See, I told you the Lego would be back. The plan to compact the Holocene clay had worked as expected, but it was this different layer down here that caused the problems.
This layer, known as Pleistocene, is made up of much thicker clay and crucially has lots of layers of sand running through it.
That means it's very difficult to predict how it will react when something this big is built on top of it.
The fact that all of this was so unpredictable actually goes to show just how advanced this airport was. Even today, there's an argument in academic circles about whether we need to actually rewrite some of the fundamental principles of soil dynamics in light of what happened at Kansai.
And before we go any further, we should say that despite its foundations, Kansai Airport really is a remarkable feat of engineering.
Take the terminal building designed by Renzo Piano. The roof has this wave-like shape. That was the result of extensive studies that found this was the perfect shape to draw cool air through the building, avoiding the need for expensive air conditioning. Because the terminal building is a whopping 1.7 kilometres long, 900 jacks were fitted underneath to level out any uneven settlement under the structure.
These jacks are automatically measured and then adjusted every few years.
Its lightweight design allows every part of the building to flex so it can absorb an earthquake without being damaged. Even the runway is paved with asphalt instead of concrete, which allows it to bend instead of snapping. In 1995, a massive earthquake struck nearby. Tragically, the neighbouring city of Kobe was devastated, but the airport and the people inside it escaped unscathed. Despite all its challenges, the airport was deemed so successful that
making
in
that bit bigger.
1999 work began on a second island to increase its capacity. And then in 2001, the American Society of Civil Engineers awarded it the Monument of the Millennium Award, along with the Hoover Dam and the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah.
The rate of settlement has almost ground to a halt, from 50 centimetres a year in 1994 to just 7 centimetres a year now. So that's it, problem solved, everyone's happy. Well, not quite.
Winds of up to 172 kilometers per
Yeah,
hour
what about to say what happened
whipped
when
up
that
seas,
motherfucker
pounded the coastline and destroyed
tsunami hit that
ships
bitch?
as Typhoon Jebi struck Japan.
In 2018, Typhoon Jebi hit Osaka Bay and sent waves crashing over the seawall, flooding the runway and other critical areas of the airport.
Little could be done to keep the
Yeah.
floodwater out, and hundreds of flights have been cancelled.
Kansai was closed for 3 days and didn't resume full service for almost another fortnight. It was a timely reminder that you can't outrun nature forever.
Hell no.
The following year, another phase of remedial works began to raise the seawall and the runway.
To stop the works interfering with the path of the landing planes, the seawall was initially raised by 2.2 metres. After this, another metre was added to the runway before the wall was then raised by another 2.7 metres.
God
Now, if you
damn.
booked a ticket to Osaka, please don't worry. This airport is perfectly safe to fly to. Despite all the struggles, Kansai is still a thriving regional hub. It's one of the busiest airports in Asia and the third busiest in Japan.
Airport bosses are so confident in the latest flood defences that the main terminal is getting a $470 million renovation, all to increase capacity and improve passenger experience. It's also a key transport hub for the upcoming Osaka 2025 Expo, which is set to draw in 28 million visitors.
Damn.
But as for its long-term future, well, who knows? The rate at which the airport's sinking has been slowed massively, but it's not expected to stop for some time yet. A 2015 report predicted that both islands could have sunk to sea level by 2067. One option is to continue to raise the runway and the seawall, but that doesn't come cheap. At some point, the airport's future becomes based on economics rather than engineering.
What we can say is that as it reaches its 30th birthday, this is a revolutionary airport which has served over 1 billion people. It remains one of the most ambitious civil engineering projects ever and has pioneered airport design for decades to come. We won't be saying goodbye for a very long time yet, but even if we one day do, its legacy will certainly live on. This video was sponsored by Innate. You can learn more about that at the link below. Don't forget that we're inspiring the next generation of builders through
That's cool.